He wasn't just a musician, he was the very spirit of country tradition. Grandpa Jones, with his trademark overalls, rapid-fire banjo playing, and booming laugh, wasn't just a performer. He was an American icon. From humble beginnings in Kentucky to becoming a beloved star on Hee Haw, Grandpa Jones embodied the heart of rural entertainment. But behind his playful persona and infectious energy, there was a man burdened by a lifetime of sorrow, suspicion, and guarded secrets. None more haunting than the night in 1973, when he stumbled upon the lifeless body of his dear friend, Stringbean Ackerman, murdered in cold blood inside his Tennessee cabin. That night changed Grandpa forever. In the years that followed, he would remain a public figure, but behind closed doors, something weighed heavy. He grew more withdrawn, more cautious, and when Grandpa Jones passed away unexpectedly, many assumed it was natural. But for years, quiet whispers have followed his legacy. Rumors that he died with knowledge he was too afraid to share. Now, in a stunning new development, long-sealed documents, unearthed journals, and never-before-heard recordings have emerged, pointing to a chilling possibility. That Grandpa Jones didn't just stumble upon a murder, he may have uncovered something far bigger, something someone wanted buried for good. The silence is finally breaking. The mystery has been solved. And the truth, set to be revealed at the end of this video, is far darker than anyone imagined. Grandpa Jones was born Louis Marshall Jones in 1913, raised in the rugged heartland of Kentucky and later Ohio. His love for mountain music started early, when he was just a boy listening to old-time fiddle tunes on front porches and dusty radios. His stage name, Grandpa, was a joke at first, poking fun at his grumpy morning demeanor, but it stuck. And as fate would have it, that name became a brand, a legacy, and a fixture of American entertainment. In the 1940s, Jones began making a name for himself on radio, performing with the Browns Ferry 4 and appearing regularly on the Grand Ole Opry. Audiences loved his wit, his down-home honesty, and his ability to switch from a joke to a heartbreak ballad without missing a beat. Over time, Grandpa Jones became one of the Opry's most beloved acts, always dependable, always real. By the 1960s, his fame exploded thanks to television, especially through Hee Haw, where his slapstick charm and musical talents reached millions every week. On camera, he was the lovable old-timer, the wisecracker in bib overalls with a twinkle in his eye. Off camera, though, things were more complex. Jones was known to be fiercely protective of his image and his family. He kept his private life guarded, and for good reason. By the early 1970s, the world around him was shifting fast. Nashville's music scene was becoming more commercialized, more corporate, and more cutthroat. The days of wholesome country ballads and gospel harmonies were being pushed aside for slicker, more radio-friendly sounds. Some older stars were quietly pushed out, others faded away. But Grandpa Jones? He refused to back down. That made him a problem for some. His close friendship with fellow country entertainer David Stringbean Ackerman had already pulled him into a tragedy. Jones was the one who found Stringbean and his wife murdered in their home in 1973, a scene so traumatic it scarred him for life. What few people knew is that Jones had suspicions about what really happened to his friend. He told people in private that there was more to that story, that Stringbean had been nervous about something in the weeks before his death, but Grandpa never said more publicly. He couldn't or wouldn't. In the years that followed, Jones became quieter, more withdrawn. Those close to him said he started keeping detailed personal journals, writing down memories, thoughts, and what he called the real stories behind what they want you to believe. And those journals? They would become key to what's coming next, because after his death, they disappeared. Until now. In the late 1980s and into the 1990s, Grandpa Jones remained a familiar face on television, though fewer fans noticed the toll that time and something else was taking on him. His performances on Hee Haw remained sharp, but behind the scenes, something had shifted. Colleagues reported that Jones seemed more paranoid. He often checked hotel rooms before settling in, traveled with private security, and even stopped answering his home phone without a special code word. Some chalked it up to age or trauma from discovering Stringbean's body years earlier, but others believed it was deeper than that. Grandpa Jones, it seemed, was afraid. During this time, rumors swirled among Nashville insiders about a so-called blacklist of older stars who had outlived their usefulness to the industry. These weren't just fading careers. It was whispered that some were being encouraged to disappear, retire, move along. In that climate, Jones stood out. He still had a devoted fan base and refused to bow out. He didn't drink, didn't do drugs, and didn't chase fame. He stayed grounded, stubbornly so. Privately, however, Grandpa Jones had started making plans. Close family friends later recalled that he had begun digitizing old letters, recording spoken memories into tape recorders, and hiding documents in what he called his gospel box, a large cedar chest that once held his religious music collection. But that chest, like his journals, would vanish the week after his death. And then came 1998. That February, Grandpa Jones suffered 2 strokes, one of which was reportedly sudden and unexplained. He had just returned from a taping and was in high spirits, according to his wife, Ramona, when he collapsed. He lingered for several days in a Nashville hospital before passing away on February 19, 1998. Officially, it was chalked up to complications from the strokes. There were no autopsies requested, and his funeral was held quickly, quietly, and without fanfare. But behind closed doors, a different story was emerging. A longtime friend of the family, who has only recently come forward, claimed that in the days before his stroke, Grandpa Jones had planned to go public with certain things about what happened to Stringbean and what was still happening in the Nashville industry. He reportedly told this friend, "If something happens to me, you need to get the box. The box has everything." Only, the box was gone. His house was searched. His personal belongings were combed through. The cedar chest? Nowhere to be found. And neither were his audio recordings or written journals. Some speculated that it had simply been moved. Others whispered that someone else got to it first. Whatever the truth, one thing was clear. Something Grandpa Jones had spent decades holding on to had vanished in the exact moment it would have mattered most. And the mystery around him was only beginning to unravel. After Grandpa Jones's passing, his legacy was mourned publicly, but handled quietly behind the scenes. His contributions to country music were undeniable. He had shaped the genre, preserved its roots, and connected it to an entire generation of Americans through humor and heart. But as his family prepared his estate, strange inconsistencies began to surface. Details that seemed minor at first, but soon raised serious questions about what had really happened in his final years. The first red flag was financial. Despite decades of touring, albums, and television appearances, the estate Grandpa Jones left behind was surprisingly modest. For a man who had been a household name for nearly half a century, his bank accounts and reported assets were far lower than expected. His wife, Ramona, also a respected musician in her own right, reportedly struggled to locate certain royalty streams and residual checks that should have been flowing in. Statements were missing. Accounts were frozen. Key pieces of paperwork had accidentally been shredded, according to one accountant. Then came the missing items. Beyond the now infamous gospel box, a number of Grandpa Jones's personal effects were unaccounted for. Letters he had exchanged with Stringbean in the years before his death, rare Opry memorabilia, signed contracts, and, perhaps most concerning of all, tapes he'd recorded in the 1990s discussing unspoken truths about the country music industry. These were not random collectibles. They were pieces of a puzzle Grandpa had clearly been assembling for years. Ramona initially chalked it up to mismanagement or simple misplacement, but those close to the family weren't convinced. One of Grandpa's nephews later revealed that in the weeks before the stroke, Jones had expressed concern that someone was watching the house, someone he didn't recognize. Neighbors even confirmed that a black SUV had been parked across the street for several nights in a row, with tinted windows and no license plate visible. In the years that followed, the narrative around Grandpa Jones's death slowly faded from public discourse. Without any sensational scandal or dramatic twist at the time, most fans assumed it was simply the passing of an aging legend. But the whispers in Nashville never stopped. A journalist from a small Tennessee publication who had been working on a retrospective about Grandpa stumbled across a storage unit registered under a fake name in 2011. Inside, tucked between dusty instruments and old show posters, were two unlabeled cassette tapes. When she played them, her breath caught, because the voice on the tapes was unmistakable. It was Grandpa Jones. And he wasn't reminiscing or singing. He was warning. He spoke about deep rot inside the country music industry, about betrayals, silencing, and what really happened the night Stringbean was murdered. What's more, he hinted that he feared the same people were watching him too. It was the first real clue in over a decade that Grandpa Jones had been sitting on something big, something dangerous. And if those tapes were real, the mystery behind his quiet passing might finally start to crack open. The tapes found in that Tennessee storage unit would prove to be more than just dusty relics of a bygone era. They were keys to a story far more chilling than anyone expected. On the recordings, Grandpa Jones didn't speak in vague generalities or cryptic metaphors. He named names, he referenced dates, and he pointed to a pattern of silence and suppression that stretched back not just to the murder of his close friend Stringbean, but across decades of country music history. In one particularly haunting section, Grandpa's voice, strained but determined, described a circle within the Nashville elite, a group of industry insiders who, according to him, controlled more than just music. They manipulated careers, silenced dissent, and, in his words, made sure the wrong stories never made it out. He claimed that what happened to Stringbean wasn't just a robbery gone wrong, but a warning. A message sent to other traditionalists who were resisting the shift toward corporate consolidation and commercial overreach in country music during the 1970s. He even alleged that he had confronted one of these figures at the Opry in the late 80s, a man still active in the business at the time, and was told to keep playing the fool and keep your mouth shut. That line, he said on the tape, had haunted him ever since. Jones also claimed that after Stringbean's murder, strange letters began showing up in his dressing room at the Ryman. Letters he never showed to police, but kept hidden in that infamous cedar chest. These allegations, while unproven, took on new weight when portions of the tapes were leaked online in 2013. Country fans, especially those of the old-school variety, were shaken. Was it possible that one of the most beloved figures in the genre had lived in fear for years? And more disturbingly, was it possible that the true reason behind his death had never been publicly revealed? Following the leak, Ramona Jones was contacted by journalists, investigators, and even former Hee Haw cast members, many of whom expressed their belief that Grandpa Jones had known more than he ever let on. Some corroborated that he often spoke in hushed tones about industry secrets, and that toward the end of his life, he became increasingly isolated and guarded. More details trickled out over the next few years. A private investigator, hired by a member of the Jones family, uncovered that the black SUV seen outside Grandpa's home in the late 1990s was linked to a Nashville security company often contracted by major record labels at the time. No official connection was ever proven, but it raised serious questions. Why would a music label security firm be observing an 80-year-old banjo player? Then, in 2019, a retired Nashville police officer came forward anonymously, claiming that during the original Stringbean investigation, files had been edited or removed before the case went public. The motive, he suggested, wasn't just about a home invasion, it was about silencing someone. As the puzzle pieces began falling into place, it became harder and harder to believe that Grandpa Jones died from natural causes alone. His life may have ended with a stroke, but the fear, the warnings, and the missing evidence suggested something more sinister had been at play for years. And now, decades later, it seemed that someone, finally, was beginning to talk. In the final years of his life, Grandpa Jones began withdrawing more and more from public life. On the surface, it appeared to be the natural winding down of a long and storied career. He had been a mainstay in country music for over 6 decades, most famously as a cast member of Hee Haw, where his comedic bits and old-timey charm made him a household name. But behind the scenes, something else was happening. Friends noticed he seemed tense, distracted, and often paranoid. He began double-locking his doors, refused to travel alone, and kept a detailed journal hidden in his study, pages later uncovered and verified by his family. In those final journal entries, Grandpa detailed strange occurrences. Phone calls in the middle of the night, with no one on the other end. Unfamiliar vehicles parked outside his rural home for hours, and the lingering feeling that eyes were always watching. He even wrote that he believed his house had been searched while he was away at a bluegrass festival in Ohio. Though nothing appeared to be missing, certain items had clearly been moved. This paranoia wasn't delusional. In fact, it tracked with the timeline of events that had started to re-emerge in the public eye. The resurfacing of old Hee Haw footage, increased media interest in the Stringbean case, and the emergence of bootlegged copies of those mysterious tapes from Grandpa's personal collection. Despite this, Grandpa never publicly acknowledged any of it. He remained the smiling face on reruns and reunion specials. But privately, he expressed to his closest friends that he feared what happened to David could happen to me. Then came the night of his stroke. It happened at the Ryman Auditorium, the very place where his career had skyrocketed. After performing a heartfelt rendition of 8 More Miles to Louisville, Grandpa reportedly collapsed backstage. Emergency crews rushed him to the hospital, but he never recovered. The official cause was listed as a stroke, and no foul play was suspected. But those who had been following the trail, the tapes, the journal, the warnings, weren't so sure. In a final twist, Ramona Jones would later confirm in an interview that just 2 weeks before his stroke, Grandpa had been planning to go public with what he knew. He had agreed to meet with a Nashville journalist who specialized in music industry corruption. The meeting never happened. The reporter, speaking anonymously, said he received a call from Grandpa's landline just days before the scheduled interview. He sounded nervous, like he wasn't sure anymore. He kept saying, "Maybe it's best if I just let it go." Then he hung up. And just like that, the last chance for a first-hand account was gone. What remains is a trail of circumstantial evidence, cryptic tapes, and eerie coincidences that suggest Grandpa Jones may have taken more secrets to the grave than anyone ever imagined. But for those still seeking answers, there's one silver lining. Some of those secrets may not have stayed buried. In the final part of this story, we'll explore the discovery that finally broke the case wide open. What happened next would shake the foundations of everything fans thought they knew about Grandpa Jones's death and string beans. It started with an estate sale. Years after Grandpa Jones passed, his family finally decided to part with some of his belongings in a quiet, private auction in Tennessee. Most of the items were simple: signed photos, vintage banjos, and mementos from the Hee Haw days. But buried in a box labeled office junk was something no one expected to find: an unmarked cassette tape sealed inside a manila envelope with a note in Grandpa's handwriting that read, "For the truth, if they ever dare." The tape was brought to a local historian who'd spent years researching the mysterious 1973 murder of David Stringbean Aikman. When the tape was played, it revealed Grandpa Jones speaking directly into a recorder. His tone was measured, but the content was chilling. He recounted conversations he had with Stringbean in the final weeks of his life, conversations filled with paranoia, fear, and the unsettling feeling that someone was watching him. Stringbean had apparently stumbled onto something he wasn't supposed to know. Grandpa never explicitly said what it was, but he hinted that Stringbean had been keeping a journal of his own, a record of shady dealings, suspicious visitors to the Opry, and odd financial arrangements involving some of country music's top brass. Even more chillingly, Grandpa claimed on the tape that he'd seen that journal. "He showed it to me once," he said. "Pages and pages of names, dates, cash. Told me if anything ever happened to him, it wasn't no robbery gone bad. He said he had enemies dressed like friends." Then Grandpa dropped the biggest bombshell. "I think I was followed after the funeral. I think someone wanted to know how much I knew. I ain't scared, but I'm not stupid either. So I'm recording this, just in case I don't get a chance to tell it myself." The tape ended abruptly. No further explanation, no names. But what it did was reopen an investigation that had long gone cold. Journalists who had once given up on the case came back to it with fresh eyes. Former law enforcement began to speak out, and Stringbean's old Opry associates started getting unexpected knocks on their doors from curious reporters and amateur sleuths. But the final piece wouldn't come until weeks later, when another box, this time found in a relative's attic, turned up what appeared to be a copy of Stringbean's lost journal. Handwritten pages, financial entries, lists of names. One entry, just 3 weeks before his death, simply read, "Told Grandpa. He believes me. Now what?" The truth, it seemed, had been scattered for decades, buried in basements, hidden in attics, and whispered in shadows. But finally, with Grandpa's own voice from beyond the grave, the outline of a much darker story was coming into focus. And in the next chapter, we examine what was in those pages and what they revealed about who really stood to gain from silence. The discovery of Stringbean's journal was like lighting a match in a dark room. For decades, the official story had been that his murder was a simple robbery gone wrong. 2 young men broke into his cabin, thinking they'd find stacks of money. And when caught in the act, they panicked and killed him and his wife. But now, with the journal in hand and Grandpa Jones's secret tape confirming its existence, that narrative began to unravel fast. The pages weren't neatly organized. They were written in uneven handwriting, sometimes on the backs of envelopes, napkins, or even torn pieces of cardboard, But they were detailed, painfully detailed. The entries documented meetings, strange visitors backstage at the Grand Ole Opry, and whispers of embezzlement and mismanaged funds within the tight-knit country music circuit. Names were listed, some well-known, others obscure. Some were followed by numbers, dollar amounts, and cryptic phrases like "check bounced again" or "asked too many questions." But there was one page that stood out from the rest. In large, scrawled letters, it read, "I don't trust that boy Marvin anymore." Underneath, he had drawn a rough map of his own property. And next to that map were notes about hidden money, emergency exits, and something that said, "Just in case I don't make it, tell Grandpa." It was clear now that Stringbean knew he was in danger. He was preparing for it. And the Marvin he mentioned? That aligned with one of the names of the two men arrested and convicted in his murder. Marvin Douglas. Until now, their motive had been seen as purely financial. But according to the Journal, Stringbean may have suspected that Marvin wasn't acting alone, that he was being directed by someone else, possibly someone on the inside. Meanwhile, Grandpa Jones had kept his silence, maybe out of fear, maybe to protect what little safety he had left. His recording didn't name names, but it connected enough dots to reignite suspicion about whether the two men arrested were truly acting alone, or if they were fall guys for something bigger. One journalist reached out to a surviving family member of Grandpa Jones and was told something haunting. He died with a heavy heart. He knew there was more to it, but he couldn't prove it. Not without that journal. The family also confirmed that Grandpa had tried to speak with police again years after the conviction, but was reportedly brushed off, told the case was closed. And so the silence endured. But now, with the journal in the hands of truth seekers and Grandpa's voice echoing from beyond the grave, that silence is breaking. Slowly, the puzzle is coming together, and the shadowy figure behind Stringbean's murder may finally be exposed. In the final part of this video, we'll lay out exactly who stood to gain the most, and why the truth may have been kept. Hid what happened next shattered the illusion that Stringbean's murder had been random. Investigators, newly assigned to review cold cases with modern resources, took the rediscovered journal seriously. Using its contents, they began to trace long-forgotten financial records, phone logs, and estate documents from the Grand Ole Opry's private archive. What emerged was a pattern, a series of suspicious financial transactions tied to a manager at the time who had quietly left Nashville just months after Stringbean's murder. That manager, now in his late 80s and living under a different name in a remote part of Arkansas, had never been implicated. But several of Stringbean's notes pointed toward a deeper betrayal, one involving mismanaged performance fees, missing royalties, and even threats disguised as business advice. When Stringbean grew suspicious, he withdrew large sums of cash and started keeping it in his home, refusing to deposit it in banks he no longer trusted. That detail was never made public, but it matched what police found in 1973. Money hidden behind walls, under floorboards, and untouched even after the robbery. The connection? According to Stringbean's notes, he confided in a few people, including Grandpa Jones, that he feared someone in the Opry's inner circle was planning to make an example of him. When Marvin Douglas and his accomplice broke in that night, they weren't just guessing where the money was. They were sent with knowledge, told what to look for, where to find it, and how much was there. The chilling implication was that this wasn't a simple robbery. It was a setup. And Grandpa Jones had known more than he could ever safely reveal. In 2025, a true crime documentary team submitted their findings to the FBI's Historic Crimes Unit. Though the original perpetrators had long since been tried and convicted, the documentary presented compelling evidence that a third party had not only orchestrated the break-in, but ensured the case was closed quickly, quietly, and with no room for follow-up questions. And now, that man, the missing link, the one who vanished from Nashville and assumed a quiet life, may finally be brought to justice. The Stringbean mystery is no longer just a story of loss, laughter, and a life cut short. It's a story of betrayal, fear, silence, and finally, truth. It took over 50 years, the rediscovery of a hidden journal, and the courage of those who refused to forget. But now, the truth has come out. And it isn't good. Den for nearly 50 years,